Ladies and gentlemen, dear members and colleagues, on behalf of the Franco-German Office for the Energy Transition, I wish you a good morning. My name is Sven Rösner and I will present today's webinar on wind energy and real estate prices. And we will take a look into a survey carried out by Ademe, the French Agency for Ecological Transition. Today, we hope that you are well. Thank you very much for having registered and tuned in today for our webinar, during which we will try to provide you with an insight into a topic that has stirred some controversy over the past years. A good example for this is the French electoral campaign that we witnessed over the past weeks and months, where some candidates argued that the impact of the development of wind parks was a menace to property value. Other candidates rejected this argument, but we understand that this idea preoccupies many people in rural areas, and it has turned into an issue limiting local acceptability for new projects. Meanwhile, we also see that the demand for electricity is rising, and it will continue to do so over the next years and decades if our nations mean to reach their climate goals. Electricity prices are on an all-time high. France and the European Union just stated that they plan emergency measures to reduce load over the summer, and the German parliament is about to vote new targets for renewables that come down to a breathtaking speed for the development of new wind and solar capacities. Acceptability is a key aspect for all of this. As the main goal of all our work is to create a better understanding of what is going on inside and around the energy transition, we wanted to provide you with a qualified vision on this problemacy. And I am therefore very happy that we managed to set up this webinar and that Amandine Vollard, who is an engineer for on and offshore wind at Ademe, accepted to present today the methodology of their survey and its major outcomes today. Good morning to you, Amandine. We are all very much looking forward to hear what you have to say. Before I pass over to you, I have some technical announcements to make. We are aware of the fact that this issue is a vast and also, to some extent, a controversial one, and that our audience might have quite a few questions for our speakers. You can submit them via the question function of the webinar cockpit. We will do our best to keep at least 20 minutes for a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, but that might not be enough to answer all of them. I'd like to apologize for this eventuality straight away. However, our speaker agreed that we forward all unanswered questions after the end of this webinar in order to get in touch with you directly. Also, the slides of the presentation will be soon available on the member section of our website, along with a video recording. A big thank you to Amandine and Ademe for your consentment. All participants shall receive a mail notifying you once these materials are available for you to download. And if you should experience difficulties with the sound or the image, my advice for you would be to shut down the webinar plugin and to relaunch it by clicking the link in the notification mail you received this morning. One last thing before we start. At the end of the webinar, you will be asked to participate in a quick questionnaire, which consists of just 5 questions. You can skip that, of course, but if you participate, you will help us to improve our format. And that's all from my side for now. Let's get started. Amandine, please take over. Have a great webinar, everyone.
Good morning and many thanks, Sven, for this introduction. I also would like to say that I'm sorry, I'm just coming back from abroad, so I'm a little bit jet lagged and I might be a bit slow this morning, so apologies for that. You can, I think, directly go to the next slide because the topic has been already introduced very well by Sven. So at Ademe, we decided to indeed build this study on the impact of onshore wind farms on real estate prices, as this is a topic which is continuously raised. And we also noticed that in France, existing studies often contain weaknesses. There are two main kinds of studies that have been conducted. One kind is only qualitative studies that may not reflect what happens on the market. So these this kind of studies mainly contain interviews of residents or of associations, and it is not representative of what happens actually on the mainland in France. And the second type is quantitative studies, which tend to suffer a lack of data to be able to give conclusions. And also, most of the time, quantitative studies can be polluted by the effect of other parameters, which means that the effect of wind turbines isn't excluded from other impacts that can be linked. I mean, wind turbines are installed in rural land, so other parameters linked to the fact that the land is rural can also impact the house prices. So this is one thing we try to take into account in our analysis. Overall, our objective was to provide a valuable and robust analysis for the French market, including both a quantitative and a qualitative phase. The quantitative phase aimed to produce measurable and repeatable results, and the qualitative phase had the aim to provide perspectives and limitations. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you can see the method we've used with two phases as mentioned, so qualitative and quantitative. And on the method, I will also show two other slides on the quantitative phase. And then we will have a Q&A session on these first slides before showing you the results. So the impact of wind turbines is measured, first of all, qualitatively, and the first thing we've done is a bibliographical analysis of almost 80 pieces. This included studies on the impact of wind farms on real estate prices, but also studies on the impact of other industrial infrastructures on real estate prices. So this would include nuclear antennas or TSO infrastructures, for instance. We also had methodological papers and papers on wind energy in general. Then on the qualitative phase, we also had a set of interviews. So 25 interviews were conducted with real estate agents, head of inquiry for wind projects, mayors, project developers, associations of opponents to wind energy, SAFER, which is an organization that deals with rural land transactions, CGEDD, which is a branch of the Ministry for the Environment, and especially we had many interviews actually with a representative for the CGEDD, who also was an expert in the analysis of the evolution of the real estate market. RTE, which is our TSO in France, and lawyers. We also tried to contact heritage associations, so associations that would deal with premium goods in France. We contacted them for an interview, but they didn't want to answer our request. Next, we also sent a questionnaire to real estate agencies through three networks of real estate agencies, which are FNIM, CITIA, and Foncia. And for this, we only got 16 generic feedback and 3 feedbacks on wind energy. So unfortunately, because of a lack of factual feedbacks, we could not use the conclusions or the results of these questionnaires. Maybe to be more precise on this specific part, the feedbacks that we received on wind energy, some people mentioned that wind energy could have a big impact on the price of real estate, but in the same time, the people who said that didn't make any cell next to wind turbines. So we considered that this was not factual enough. And of course, we had a bit lack of a number of replies to be able to use these questionnaires. And finally, on the qualitative part, there was a field survey with 20 cities that were visited in 4 different regions in France. And from this, we had 124 feedbacks from residents that we could use this time. So that was for the qualitative part of our studies. Again, I will show you the results just after the first Q&A session. And on the quantitative part, we did 2 different things. First of all, we did some descriptive statistics, which include a cartography of mainland France and analysis of the real estate prices dependencies. I will come back to that, but maybe to explain this. How to say that? This was to highlight the fact that price of houses depends on many factors. So we wanted to, first of all, in this study, put in evidence what are the main factors that would drive the costs up or down. So this is what we did through the descriptive statistics. And finally, we did a difference in difference statistic method. This was performed by our partner in this study, which is EAC Partners. And this analysis was performed on the base of DVF, which is a database from the Ministry of Finance, gathering all transactions from 2015 to 2020 in France. And we combined this database with an internal database at Ademe, which gathers wind turbine with the coordinates of wind turbines installed in France until the end of 2020. So that was it for the main picture of the method. And then maybe if you can go to the next slide, I'll give a more detailed insight on the difference in difference method. Thank you. So basically, this method is based on this. We build a control group and a treatment group. The treatment, in our case, is the commissioning of a wind turbine. So in the control group, we will include only transactions that are far from wind turbines. So we made several trials. We kept a distance of more than 15 kilometers to a wind turbine, more than 20 kilometers to a wind turbine in this control group. In the end, we kept the distance of 20 kilometers, but it didn't change a lot. So we can consider that after 15 kilometers from a wind turbine, it is far enough for wind turbines not to have an impact anyway. So in the control group, we will have transactions that are on territories that are similar to transactions which are in the treatment group. But in the treatment group, all transactions will be closed to wind turbines. And here again, we made several distances trials. So from 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20 to see what happens. But yeah, the common point between the treatment group is that we will be closer to wind turbines than in the control group. So maybe if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. Based on that, we will build a counterfactual. The counterfactual is basically a copy of the control group on the treatment group, starting from the point of the wind turbine commissioning. Basically, what it says is that if there had no wind turbine commissioned in the treatment group, it would have behaved the same as the control group. And yeah, this is basically the basis of understanding of the method that we use. So in the end, the impact that we will measure and that is the result of our study is the difference between the yellow curve and the blue curve. And what we also did is, since we don't exactly know when the effect will take place, is it at the commissioning, is it a little bit before, is it a little bit after, we used several starting points for the counterfactual, and we integrated these trials in our analysis. So I hope this was clear. Sorry again if it's a bit slower or a bit blurry, but I can take questions if you have some question on this specifically or on anything else on the method, because if you go to the next slide, I think we are on the first Q&R session.
Yes, thank you very much, Amandine, for this insight into your methodology. And to our spectators, please don't hesitate to send us your questions on this section right now, so we can pick them up, and we will have a second Q&A session a little bit later, where we will talk more about what you will present in a second about the findings of your survey. For me, what I would find interesting is to learn a bit more about how you went about to select your samples. Was this a remote selection, or how did you go about it?
You mean for the quantitative phase?
Random selection, excuse me. Yes, if you what you just presented, we understand that there is a certain size of the sample. Has this geographical distribution that is pretty even, or were there some regions, for example, you treated more? And how did you go about selecting maybe also the property in these regions?
So for the quantitative, thank you for that question. For the quantitative phase, we basically used all the data that we had. So the database from the Ministry of Finance, which gathers the transactions from 2015 to 2020, is very inclusive. So it gathers everything. It has more than 1.5 million transactions over the whole time set. So we used all these data. There was kind of a natural selection, if you could say, because as mentioned, for the method, it would mean that, for instance, we could not include the houses that were sold, let's say, for instance, in 2017, but next to which a wind turbine would have been installed in 2002, because then there would be like something like 15 years of difference between the time when the turbine is commissioned and the time when the house is sold. So we this is an hypothesis, but we believed that we would not have seen any difference. So this is how the samples got reduced. And then, as I mentioned, we also have had a reduction of the sample, basically because we tried several distances to wind turbines. So we tried from 0 to 5, 5 to 10, and 10 to 15 to compare this with the control group. And so, of course, the sample which is located from 0 to 5, it's geometrical, but it's smaller than for the other samples. So overall, we used all the data that we could. And yeah, one thing I forgot is, so I will go maybe deeply into that just after, but we wanted to make groups that would be comparable. So the way we build groups is also making sure that they have the same socioeconomics characteristics. So for instance, yeah, maybe I will come back to that on the results to give more details, but mainly this is how we did for the quantitative phase. And for the qualitative phase, when we did interviews on the field, what we tried to do is to have 4 different regions representative of the diversity of France. So there were some interview in northern France, Normandy, southwest, and I think the last one was southeast, I believe. And here again, the way we selected cities was to try and have a good diversity of rural city of what could be a rural city in France. And then we interviewed people by just going on very strategic places of villages, so close to the church or at the market, like the local market, on very specific time to make sure we have a lot of people to interview there. So yeah, this is how we selected our samples.
Okay, so we will see more of that in a second. That's a nice teaser. One last question on the methodology. You mentioned that you also worked with, for example, RTE. You mentioned also other uh, things that could impact potentially property value. Is this really documented in your survey? A comparison, let's say, of the impact of wind turbines in comparison to a grid line or a nuclear power plant or some other industrial activities, for example.
Yes, yes, exactly. And I will show actually a graph on the results section that shows a comparison of the impact of these different infrastructures. It was actually an interesting exercise to do, and it also gives a good comparison. So yeah, we did that.
So we are looking forward to that, and I think we will move on to the results section of your survey, and we we speak later. And to you, our audience, if you want to post your questions, please do so maybe already during the presentation so that we can pick them up straight away after Amandine finished her presentation. Speak to you in a second.
Thanks. So regarding the results, you can see here again the results of the different phases. We'll go in the same order. So for the qualitative phase on the bibliographical analysis, what we saw is that the impact of wind turbines on housing real estate prices is of a few percent, and it decreases with the distance to the turbines and becomes zero after around 10 kilometers. The results that we have seen greatly vary from a study to another. It depends on the country, on the method used, and also probably on the local perception of wind energy. So this is the result of what we've analyzed within the 79 articles, studies that we've analyzed. On the interviews, what we've seen is that for very specific and very few cases, so for instance, exceptional properties are extremely close to wind turbines could have a significant impact on price of about 20%, minus 20%, and on the easiness to sell the goods. But this result has to be put in perspective with the fact that we only interviewed 25 representatives. And this is something we could not confirm with the quantitative results. However, it's something to keep in mind, and we will follow this study with probably a more specific study, and we will have we will keep an eye on these specific issues like exceptional properties and very close to wind turbines, but I will come back to it. As mentioned before, questionnaires to real estate agencies did not give any workable outcome because of the lack of factual results and lack of data. And finally, for the qualitative phase, so the field surveys, it appeared from the 124 interviews that we gave that wind turbines are not a significant factor driving the real estate prices down for a vast majority of residents. So from the interviews we gave, only 3% of the residents mentioned that wind turbine would have an impact on the price of their house. And one of the things is that the negative impacts of wind turbines are expressed in a more concrete way than positive impacts. So I should have said that before, but what we asked during the field surveys, it was actually two questions. The first one being, what are, according to you, the three main factors driving the cost of a house up or down? So 3 main factors for up and 3 main factors for driving the cost down. And the second question we ask is, what are, according to you, the two negative impacts of a wind turbine and 2 positive impacts of a wind turbine? We asked the questions in that way, in that sense. I mean, the first one on real estate prices before, to avoid bias. And so maybe on this last part, the fact that negative impacts are expressed in more concrete terms than positive impacts, the way it showed in the field surveys results is that the negative impacts mentioned by residents were like impact on the landscape, noise, electromagnetic field, impact on birds. So even if it had not been directly seen or felt by the residents, it was very, very concrete. And however, for positive impacts that we gathered, it was more, okay, wind turbines are ecological, they are good for the environment, they are renewable energies. So this is very far from the everyday life of residents. So this is something that we noticed, and that can be interesting from sociological point of view, and that we will, I think, examine in the next phase of the study that I will talk about later. And then results for the quantitative phase. So this will also answer the question that Sven had just before. On the descriptive statistics, what we analyzed is that the 3 main drivers that explain the cost of houses are the level of rurality of the city, of the territory that we analyze, and that is expressed by the distance to the closest to 20,000 inhabitant city and the rate of vacant properties. The standard of living, so the revenue of the residents, and the proximity to a touristic site. So this means that we had to take into account the fact that those 3 drivers would be very important for our control and treatment group. So our treatment group and control group would have always the same level of rurality, standard of living, and proximity to a touristic site. Because if we hadn't do that, we would probably have an impact on the quality of the results. So this also helped making samples for our statistics exercise. And so finally, for the difference analysis that we've done, the results are that after 5 kilometers from a wind turbine, there is no impact of the wind turbine on the impact of on the price of houses. And below 5 kilometers, the impact on the price per square meter is of minus 1.5%. So just for information, below 5 kilometers is the equivalent to around 10% of the houses sold in France, in mainland France, between 2015 and 2020. And what we also did, sorry, I didn't mention that, is that we tried to measure the impact of wind turbines on the turnover of houses. In other terms, does a wind turbine prevent a sale? And the answer that we found is that it's not the case. The way we analyzed that, it was to see the turnover rate of house selling at different distances from a wind turbine, and the graphs that we found are actually how can I say that? It's not monotonous. So we cannot see any specificities of these graphs close to a wind turbine or far from of a wind turbine. So in the end, our result is that there is no impact measured on the number of transactions. If you can go to the next slide. So maybe this is to reflect on the results, and on in particular on this minus 1.5% of impact. What we can say is that the effect of wind turbines is similar to the impact of other infrastructure projects, and it is around 10 times lower than appreciation rates of rural properties. Um, so basically, the appreciation rate of rural properties is of around 10 to 20%, meaning that if you have several real estate agencies coming to you and estimating your house, you might have a difference of 10 to 20%, especially if you're in a rural market. Moreover, we also found that the image linked to an infrastructure can evolve very much over time, and this would have, of course, an impact on the results. And this also gives an answer to one of Sven's questions before. We made a comparison of the effect of wind turbines and the effect of other infrastructures. Sorry for the typo here. And most studies show that infrastructure of the panel that we have studied have an impact lower than 10% on real estate prices and are decreasing with the distance. And above 10 kilometers, none of the identified infrastructures seem to have an impact on real estate prices. If you go to the next slide, we will have a bigger view of this small graph showing the impact seen on the bibliographical analysis of different infrastructures. So you have in gray mobile phone masts, in red thermal power station, in black landfill sites or incinerators, in blue high voltage line, and in green wind turbines. And yeah, this illustrates what I've just said, is that the impact stays below 10% and decreases with the distance. And as you can see, we can see that the green dots are actually quite close to the impact that could be the impact of a thermal power station or landfills and incinerator or high voltage line. So it's very comparable, and wind turbine is not specific compared to other industrial installations. Next slide, please. This is just a small overview of the reactions that we have after the publication of the study, which took place during the European Conference on Energy Transition in Geneva on the 1st June of this year. So within 2 weeks, we had around 10 medias, including 5 mainstream medias who disseminated the results. This maybe highlights the fact that it's a very controversial and redundant topic for the public. And one thing maybe even more interesting is that 2 associations which are against the development of wind turbines, Vent de Colère and Fédération Environnement Durable, have addressed an open letter to Ademe after the publication of the study to criticize the results. And on this letter, what has been criticized is the follow-up committee of the study. We had 3 meetings of a follow-up committee during the study, and this follow-up committee was composed of syndicates, like trade associations of wind energy, also syndicates for housing, 2 of them actually, 2 syndicates, representatives from the ministries. OFAT also was part of this committee. We had an association representative of cities, and especially rural cities in which wind turbines could be developed. And we also had this representative I mentioned before from CGEDD, who was particularly important for us during this study because he was an expert in statistical analysis of houses price evolution. So here again, what was criticized by the 2 associations was that the follow-up committee was made of too many people from the wind energy sector. But actually, we figured that we found quite a good balance between representatives from different interests and not only the wind sector. Moreover, the follow-up committee didn't have a role at all in writing the report, which is something we did only with IAC partners and that we didn't share until the publication with the follow-up committee. What was also criticized was the available data and the samples of data. This is something I will come back to in the next slide, which will also be the final slide. But it was indeed a limitation of the study. We wanted to go further, not further, closer to wind turbines during the study. So, for instance, we wanted to analyze what happens in between 0 and 500 meters or 500 meters and 2 kilometers of a wind turbines. But well, of course, from 0 to 500 meters, there are only few houses because now it's forbidden in France to have wind turbines so close to a house, but it used to be possible before. So we wanted to go that close, but because of the fact that we did not have enough data on these specific areas, we could not give a result. As mentioned before, we had to, even if we analyzed 1.5 million transactions, the samples were smaller than that because we had to make control group and treatment group that were similar in terms of socioeconomic characteristics. And then we also had to take into account only the houses next to which wind turbines was built just before or just after the sale of the house. So yeah, that's a point that we actually know and that we took into account. So there is no surprise with this criticism. And finally, the letter mentions that we did not analyze the number of transactions close to wind turbines, and more specifically, the impact of wind turbines on the ability for a house to be sold or not. But this is actually something that we analyzed and that I mentioned before by analyzing the turnover rate of houses at different distances of a wind turbine. So yeah, I thought it was interesting to share with you this criticism and the answers that we can make to these criticisms. Next slide, please. So this is the final slide. Sorry, here I have a few typos which are remaining on the slide, but I think it is still understandable. As I just mentioned, the main limit of the study is the lack of available data to give conclusions on particular segments. More specifically, we could not regionalize the results, but we tried to. So what I didn't mention is that for the quantitative phase, we also tried to have results per regions of France, because as you might know, the regions of France are very different from one another. In some regions, houses are quite dispersed, scattered on the territory. Some regions are very touristic, some are very flat, so with a lot of turbine, very dense. So we wanted to have a more territorialized set of results, but because of the quantity of data available, we could not do that. When we did the trials, we ended up with deviation rates that were too high and samples of results that were too low. Something else that we wanted to analyze and that I mentioned is the impact of wind turbines very close to houses, so in the radius of 500 meters to 2,000 meters. Again, we could not do that because we did not have enough data in this specific radius. And finally, the impact of wind turbines on premium goods, actually just like the impact of wind turbines on very close houses to wind turbines, were suggested by the qualitative analysis, but these impacts could not be confirmed by the quantitative analysis. So regarding these different limitations, what we want to do is to give a follow-up on this study. We have here good, robust results that can be exploited and that are that we are confident with. But now we would like to maybe do an in-depth sociological study in France. So methods and yeah, the methodology and the questions will have to be defined, but probably this will be a field survey within a distance lower than 2 kilometers to wind turbines to analyze to analyze the perception of residents regarding to the wind turbines proximity. So here again, we have to give a big a big thinking of what we're and how we are going to do this study. But one of the conclusion of this first study that we did is that the topic is very as a very sociological let's say tendency, and to us the best way to give a next phase to this first study is to go in more details with the sociological analysis of the topic. So I think that's it for me, and I'm ready to take your questions if you want to skip to the next slide for the Q&R. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much again, Amandine. This is very interesting, and we understand that this is not the final report, and it's good to see that you plan to go further in your survey. One question when you were talking about limitations that came to my mind was, did you also consider the question of how many wind turbines are around, if there is a link between, let's say, a mass phenomenon of wind turbines around a property, the different sizes, especially in France, where the guichet ouvert also led to a tendency of either very big wind parks or rather small ones with 6 or less turbines, and also, of course, in terms of height of the turbines, because the parks you were looking to at on your from what I took from your curve was rather old parks. So in the meantime, the height has increased considerably of new parks in terms of the nave height. So did you look into that also?
That's something we wanted to include in the analysis, but just like for it's one of the limitations as well. We did not have enough data to be able to make smaller samples. So that's something we will probably want to analyze in the next phase of the study. The only parameter that we analyze is the commissioning of a wind turbine, not depending on the size or on the size of the wind farm. So only the turbines commissioned somewhere between 2015 to 2020. I say somewhere because we had some, because of the statistical analysis, we had some a little bit before and a little bit after were analyzed. So it is true that the impact of the height and the density is a sensibility that we did not analyze yet.
Okay. So that might be interesting to see it in the future. Did you also look at compensation? For example, it is mandatory, of course, if you build a wind park, but did you measure its impact actually on property prices? It must have an impact on acceptability as a whole, but is there to some extent something that can be extrapolated to identify if that actually has an impact on property value?
So it is something we have, I would say, started to analyze, especially because it's in the bibliographical analysis. RTE have compensated the impact of electrical transmission lines a few years ago, but it was like a flat rate for the compensations that have happened. So we've seen that it's been done in the past for one kind of infrastructure, but then it would raise the question of, okay, what do we do with other infrastructure? Because as we've seen in the analysis, the impact of wind turbines is around the same as other industrial infrastructure. That it would mean that industries would have to overall compensate all their impacts to residents. So it is it's a larger question than just for wind. So that's one thing. And the other thing is it also raises the question of collective compensation versus individual compensation, because there is already a collective compensation which is not seen by the residents, and that's something we've seen through the field survey. When we ask to residents what is the positive impact of wind turbine, it's not been mentioned that there were some compensation to the cities directly. So it's not seen. It's not something that's very concrete for the residents. And on the other hand, some would expect some individual compensation directly. So it's a topic that's a bit complicated, and that does not concern only wind turbines, actually.
Okay, well, we have seen that case also in Brittany, of course, where in one case a court ruled in favor of compensation for a property owner. You mentioned, I found that very interesting that you looked at the time if there was, let's say, the possibility to identify for how long a property would remain on the market to see if it's more difficult to sell. Did you also measure to what extent maybe a property is sold more regularly in regions or in parts of the country closer to a wind park than in others? Did you observe or did you look into that, or is that something you're planning to do maybe?
That's something we would like to go deeper in, maybe in the next phase, because right now we just focused on, okay, does wind turbines affect the turnover rate of housing sales, which is not the case. But right now, what would be interesting is to see and discuss with residents to understand the history of transactions, what happened. Was the wind turbine a topic of discussion during the negotiations, knowing that it's also very I mean, it's a market, so it has, as I mentioned, a very deep sociological aspect, where in a negotiation we will find all possible reasons to drive costs down for one of the party or high for the other party. So that's something we will examine in deeper details, probably in the sociological study to come.
Okay. And talking about the next steps, do you have a time frame in mind until when you're planning to come up with new results to complete? I mean, we have seen different, very interesting topics you want to look into, the 0 to 2 kilometers sections, which are maybe the most critical ones. Do you have in mind when you're planning to publish that?
For this first step, like the study for which I presented the results today, we wanted to go rather quickly, I would say, because there was kind of an emergency to give a first set of answers. And this set of answers already, with that, we're able to say that a wind turbine does not have an impact systematically of minus 20% on every house that is sold next to a wind turbine. So this is something we really can't say with this study. So let's say we have now some robust results, which are a bit not detailed, but yeah, we wanted to go quick and have a first set of results to present. For the next step, we maybe are not such in an emergency, even if it's still of very much interest to go deeper. So I don't have a specific time set in mind. Our objective now would be to be able to actually take the time to go on the field and go into very very much details. Right now, we are defining a methodology through discussions with sociologists. So I can't be too sure about a time set for the next phase. Hopefully, maybe in let's say 1 year and a half or 2 years from now, we would have results. I think I can say that.
Okay, so we are looking forward to see that. Um, one question about something you mentioned about uh, the impact being lower than 10% lower than rural appreciation. What do you mean by rural appreciation? Can you develop that a little bit, please?
Sure. So by that, I mean, if you sell your house and you call different real estate agencies to give an estimation of your house, the difference of estimation between, let's say, 3 or 5 or more real estate agencies can be of minus or plus 10 to 20% from one agency to another. So this is a comparison we wanted to give to show that there are other factors, human factors, that would have a much bigger impact than a wind turbine when you sell your house. And yeah, it was maybe to give a comparison, just like the fact that we wanted to analyze the impact of other in industrial infrastructure. It was to put this minus 1.5% in perspective, because it's just a number. So what does it mean in the end? Is it big compared to other factors or not? And our answer is no, it's not a big number.
So you would say that real estate agents overestimate maybe the impact of a wind park next to property when they do an estimation?
Um, no, so maybe I wasn't clear. So not taking into account wind turbines, if you sell a house and you have several real estate agencies that come and give an estimation of your house, this estimation will vary. Let's say if maybe you thought you could sell your house, I don't know, it's just an example, 200,000 euros. Some real estate agency will estimate the price of 220 or 220,000 or 40,000 euros, and some of them will estimate your house at 160 or 180,000 euros, depending on actually just a human factor, because yeah, depending on the people, some characteristics can be more valued than others. This is what I meant. So not depending on wind turbines at all.
Okay, great, thank you. And now maybe the $50,000 question. What did the authorities say in France? Will this change something about how onshore wind is considered in France? We heard in Belfort that targets will go down. Will this change something, or would you say there is a case for a change in what priority we or the government should give onshore wind?
I would love to have an answer to that question. Unfortunately, I don't. But I think one of the very interesting results of this study is that this topic is highly person dependent, sociological. It's a sort of sociological topic before everything else, and it's one of the things you can see in the full report and the synthesis of the report are in French, but there might be some parts, even if you don't speak French, that would be understandable. And one of the things, actually, it may be something that's are in the set of slides. Just give me 1 second. Yes, if you go on slide, I don't know if that's possible. If you go on slide
Yes.
29 of this set. So sorry, this one. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So on this slide, you can see posters of presidential campaigns from François Mitterrand and Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, in 1965 and in 1981. You can see in 1965, François Mitterrand posing in front of an electrical line, and behind, I don't know if you can see, it's like incinerators or thermal stations, energy generation stations. So back in that time, this landscape would mean progress, employment, innovation, and it says François Mitterrand, a young president for a modern France. And in 1981, on the contrary, François Mitterrand poses in front of a very calm and rural landscape with trees, and you can see a church and small houses, while Valéry Giscard d'Estaing poses in front of I think it's probably a power plant again. So I mean, it's very just a symbol, it's just an example, but it shows that depending on the needs of a population at a certain time, the vision that you will have of an impact will vary very much. So right now, wind turbines are on the debate, are seen as a threat from some people, but maybe tomorrow, with climate emergency being more and more present, this could change quite quickly. So that's maybe one of the main results that could make the government change his mind, saying that, okay, people and residents will have opinions anyway, but what's the priority right now? And I think you mentioned it very well in the introduction. We have an emergency on having access to electricity and having access to a clean CO2-free electricity. So CO2 is not the only consideration. We have to consider the way projects are built. Is the population included in discussion? Is biodiversity protected? But that's something we can do if the projects are well done. So yeah, it brings something to the debate, I think, hopefully.
Very, very interesting. I participated last week in a conference by Uniden, so for German audience, that is the syndicate or the industry association of electro-intensive companies in France. And one person from the region Hauts-de-France, representative of a metal furnace company, asked if there was not a way for Uniden to help to boost the acceptability of wind farms onshore in this region, because they need the electricity dearly. They cannot continue their work if they don't get more electricity, and they see that renewables are the quicker way to develop generation. So maybe you are right. Maybe we will see a shift in opinion, public opinion, over the coming years. And we will, of course, be looking forward to what you have to say with the second part of your survey. Thank you very much, Amandine. We are already reaching the end of this webinar. So big thanks to Amandine for this very interesting presentation and the Q&A session, and that all despite the jet lag. I would also like to thank Stephanie, Audrey, and Emma from our team for preparing this webinar and for their technical support today behind the scenes. And before we sign off, just a few announcements. The slides and a video recording of this session will be soon available for you in the member section of our website. Coming up next at the Franco-German Office, we have tomorrow, that is the 29th of June, a political debate on the transformation towards a net zero industry and society, with many interesting contributors, like the Federal Secretary of State for Energy in Germany, Patrick Reichen, Director General for Energy and Climate in France, Laurent Michel, the German MP Nina Scher, Geoffroy Abécassis from Ademe, Dominique Carlac from the French Employer Federation MEDEF, and Professor Dr. Löschel from Ruhr-Uni Bochum. So we see we will be directly in line with what we just said at the end of our webinar here. Energy is becoming really the core of many of our problems right now, and a lot of people that maybe thought this was more like a gadget topic for the last years are really reconsidering their positions right now, and we will explore that tomorrow. So make sure you're registered and participate tomorrow. We have so far over 200 registrations, and there are no places left at the French embassy, but you can still tune in online. So make sure you take a look on our website. After the summer break, we will continue on September 20th with the conference on energy efficiency services. And on September 20th, we will be in Hamburg at Wind Energy with a side event on the impact and interaction of onshore wind and the power grid, another very interesting issue concerning onshore wind power. We are also preparing a new series of webinar on a large variety of topics that will be held after the summer break. So please do make sure you're on our mailing list and stay thereby updated. You can register for all our conferences and webinars on ofate.eu or dfbew.eu, where you will very soon find also today's slides and very many interesting publications for you to download. And this is all from my side for now. Thank you very much for tuning in and being with us today. And please don't forget to stay safe. See you very soon. Bye bye.